Thank you. Hello, everyone. We just want to give a little bit of background about why we did this, because I think everybody knew that reaching a free trade agreement with the EU in 12 months was always going to be very ambitious. And of course, now with coronavirus, it's become virtually impossible. So the idea that getting an extension agreed by a Brexiter government with a massive majority seemed really unrealistic. And we thought, well, is that really, I mean, there's no harm in trying to get an extension, but let's put our energies into something that we feel could actually have an impact on the shadow front bench, who don't seem to really want to engage with an extension at the moment. So we just started thinking about, well, if we were to give some sort of thinking piece to the shadow front bench that could give them a way to hold the government to account without getting into an argument about process, which is essentially what an extension is. Let's try and come up with something that we think should be core principles of any sort of Labour Party, and something that is important to the country too. So we started writing some principles that we feel that a free trade agreement should abide by, knowing full well that we probably won't get them, but at least we can have something that says this is the benchmark by which you should judge whether a free trade agreement is good or not. And it's written very much through the lens of how the general public might view this. So there's kind of two parts to this. The first part I'm going to share is what our 10 principles are. And then Kaz, who has brilliant expertise in from the more economic side of how free trade agreements work, can then talk about how divergence is essentially bad on all of these 10 principles and why they are. So he'll do that, and then we can go into our Q&A. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to share my screen, because it's easier when you've got something. Can you, Mike, can you give me permission to share my screen?
Yes, I can.
Thanks.
Sorry, hold on. I think to do that, I just need to make you a co-host, and then you can do whatever you like, and I will do the same with Kaz as well.
Perfect. Okay, I don't know whether I don't think Kaz will necessarily need to share his screen, but it's easier when you've got quite a lot of information to look at a screen rather than just listen to someone talking. Right, if you just bear with me for a minute, so I can. There we go. Can everyone see my screen? Okay, I can see nodding, so I think that's good. Okay, so essentially what we've called these are, we've called these 10 principles for a positive future with Europe. And the first one is workers' protection. And we believe that what Keir Starmer and his team should be pushing for is that workers' rights and protections are maintained and improved on, with guarantees that they cannot be undermined in the future. So hopefully that's pretty straightforward, everyday language that really talks about dynamic alignment and all the things that really should be part of any free trade deal. The second principle is about livelihoods protected. And this is really about British businesses, manufacturing, and the livelihoods of our rural communities must be protected and must not be undermined by a race to the bottom with cheaper substandard imports entering the UK. Now, what that is, sorry, that's my phone, excuse me. What that's trying to touch on is the very real possibility that all of our agricultural standards are going to be undermined in order to get a fast deal with the US. And, you know, I think that animal welfare, for example, which is a relatively, how can I say, I don't want to say marginal issue, because I'm sure I'll probably offend somebody by saying that, but it is not sort of front page news at the moment, but it's the kind of thing that I think British people would be really, really angry about if they felt that animals were somehow being exploited or our standards were regressing on that front. So this principle is really about saying you cannot undermine the livelihoods of our communities, including our rural communities, and that there really shouldn't be a race to the bottom. The third one is a world-leading service sector needs to be protected, and we know how important the service sector is to the economy. And so it's 78% of our economy, so non-tariff barriers such as data sharing and access to talent must not be imposed on this sector as a result of any future deals, nor must emerging industries be prevented from flourishing through protectionist policies that prevent access to a digital single market. And actually, Kaz is going to talk about that when we get to this point. But essentially, we have an enormously rich sector with lots of creative industries flourishing, lots of tech industries flourishing. And if they are unable to work and operate as freely as they are at the moment, with all the absence of any barriers, particularly non-tariff barriers, then this sector could be significantly undermined. Care for our planet was the fourth principle. Our climate change goals of net zero by 2050 are to be adhered to, and any future deals should accelerate our ability to achieve them, along with our commitment to the UN's 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which are all very solid goals. And no government should sign up to anything that's going to delay us being able to deliver those as a country. The fifth is preserve consumer standards. Our food and consumer standards should be protected to ensure that every British shopper knows they have the best quality product choice in the world, achieved through the highest and most humane standards. And this again nudges on the whole animal welfare aspect of this. And there's been a lot of talk about there'll be higher tariffs on US agricultural goods, but of course, that's the US is never really going to go with that, because they're not going to get enough people actually buying their products if that's the case. And even on Sunday, Rishi Sunak basically said absolutely that there would be no undermining of our standards when it came to agricultural standards. And he absolutely said that en masse. Now, how they're going to be able to balance those things up is going to be really interesting. So we need to put that really central to our core principles. The sixth principle is protection for our public services. Our public services, like the NHS, are our greatest asset, and any trade deals must not interfere with the quality of services provided to our citizens or with access to drugs and medical research. And again, this principle touches on quite a few things, not just talent, but also all the research that's going on at the moment with looking for the coronavirus vaccine, and also it's the medical research agency, the European Medical Research Agency. At the moment, that does not seem to be part of the debate from what I've seen. So we need to make sure that it's not just our NHS is looked after in the UK, but its ability to be able to operate at a best-in-class standard does require a free movement and exchange of information from all the sort of the medical research agencies and drugs based in the EU. The seventh is promote UK science and technology leadership. The UK has some of the best minds and talents in the world, so we must continue to participate in global organisations at the forefront of scientific and technological discovery. And that's another one that nudges at our ability to work with the best academic institutions in the world and in Europe. And that also means us being part of the Horizon 2020 programme and all the other sort of thought leadership and scientific leadership organisations that the EU currently has. 8 is transparency and accountability. Our democracy is at the heart of our freedoms, and trade deals must be transparent and open to scrutiny to ensure that human rights and citizens' rights are protected and improved where necessary. I think we've all been quite surprised at the idea that trade deals can agree principles and Parliament does not have to sign off on those in any way. I think there was an assumption that the government cannot sort of unilaterally make these decisions without some sort of accountability. And it's because we've never really needed that kind of functionality before in Parliament, because that's all been done out of Brussels. So this in and of itself feels like quite an important thing, not just for the current negotiation, but also for future negotiations. And I really don't know, I'm not a constitutional lawyer, so I don't know how we would actually tackle that, but that does feel like an important goal. 9, positive immigration approach. Our immigration policy is based on fairness, skills, fairness, skills needed, opportunities for our citizens, and the recognition that immigration makes a positive contribution to our economy, public services, and culture. In turn, we must assure that UK citizens do not lose opportunities to work and study abroad. Now, I guess this could be called a bit of a fantasy principle, because essentially what it's talking about is free movement of labour. But it is part of, you know, we are an internationalist party, and it is one of the things that we are, you know, the only party is, you know, aside, the only major party that is promoting a positive relationship with immigration. So again, not sure if this is the exact wording, but this is essentially, we believe this is a really important principle. And the final one is justice, equality, and shared prosperity. A just and fair society is at the heart of our values, so future trade arrangements must support greater equality and prosperity across the regions and peoples of the UK, regardless of gender, race, ability, religion, or lifestyle. Again, another sweeping principle, but this also specifically touches on the fact that, in one of the things that Kaz can talk about shortly, that actually there will be a disproportionately negative impact across the regions of the UK if there is no deal, or if there is a very shallow free trade deal. And so that feels like something also critically important, given the whole sort of levelling up policy that Boris Johnson has been talking about for a while now. So those are the 10 principles. I don't know if anyone's got any questions, or whether Kaz should just come in and maybe talk about these, and specifically about what are the implications for greater divergence as we move into these individual areas. Now, I can't actually see anyone whilst I'm sharing my screen. So if there's any, if we want Kaz to just start straight away, Mike, do you want to just let me know?
Yeah, sorry. Yes, Kaz, jump straight in. That's great. And we'll go to Q&A when we've heard from you, if that's all right.
Right, I'll leave it on screen, Kaz, so you can see it.
Great, that's fantastic. Thanks, Elena. I hope everyone can hear me okay. So yeah, I'm Kaz. I'm a part of Labour Business. So one of the sort of guiding principles that we put forth, and these 10 principles, tends to be really much enshrined as being part of the European Union. And so one of the biggest debates that we face is to what extent, if the UK diverges away from the European Union, we diverge from these principles. And I think this is probably broadly the biggest debate that we are going to face. The Conservative government does want to have further divergence, and it's based around this assumption that the European Union has high regulations, tends to have anti-business principles, which I personally disagree with them. But one of the arguments we try to put forth in our document is to show actually that divergence is actually bad for UK businesses going forward. So I think a lot of us are worried about a no-deal Brexit, broadly speaking, because of tariffs. So if you look at the automotive sector, for instance, you know that car components will get 4.5% on tariffs, and a full car is 10% on the tariffs as a whole. And we know that in agriculture industries, because of the low margins that products are sold across borders, any tariffs would have an impact for UK farmers going through. So obviously, it would have an implication for UK exports if we do have a no-deal deal going forward. But actually, broadly speaking, we know that the biggest barrier to trade are not actually tariffs, but non-tariff barriers as a whole. And we also know that the UK has done sort of prospered really well by having close alignment with the European Union as a whole. So I really sort of start with this fact that 72% of all firms outside of the European Union that invested into the UK did so because the UK was part of the single market. And I often see the UK as the main country in Europe to go to set up the European headquarters. And so what I'm going to do here is sort of talk about services, manufacturing, agriculture, and explain to you why further divergence is going to be bad for UK businesses as a whole, and why there's a lot of myth around why harmonization of standards is anti-business, and in fact it can be seen as more pro-business in the context for the UK. So if you look at a lot of US firms, if a US firm wants to set up a European subsidiary in Europe, they're most likely going to go to the UK. They're going to go to the UK because we share a similar language. The UK tends to have quite a competitive environment, obviously has at the moment free links across Europe. So essentially, you can do all your business activities within the UK and use UK as a hub to export across the European Union. And that doesn't just go for US firms, but it goes for Japanese firms, Chinese firms, Indian firms, and so on and so forth. And the reason why that is if you're a Japanese executive and you know a European or Western language, it's most likely going to be English. So they feel more comfortable doing business in the UK as opposed to the rest of Europe. And the reason why this works really well with the UK is because we have agreed standards across the European Union. You can do all the productions in the UK and export into Europe without having to adapt your products or anything like that. Now, if the UK diverges from the European standards and regulations, it's going to cause a lot of barriers. So if you are a car manufacturer and you're manufacturing in the UK, for instance, at the moment, we can export into the European Union without any custom checks, without any checks on standards, or anything like that, because currently UK law is aligned with European law. But if we remove and diverge away from that, then essentially there has to be checks to make sure that UK products are meeting EU standards, and that causes barriers and barriers to trade going forward. And this deters firms from wanting to set up their European headquarters in the UK. So we see this as an issue for Nissan, and we also see this as an issue for our supply chains who are exporting across the European Union. So we say this is very much anti-business in a sense. But the reason why we're deeply concerned of this goes to the point about regional inequality. Now, the arguments from economists to support divergence from the European Union is that yes, manufacturing industries will suffer, but actually the UK's core strength lies in our services sector. As many of you know, 80% of the UK economy is sort of driven by our service sector. But actually, if you look at in the West Midlands, actually it's a less of a significant role, and manufacturing plays a bigger role, and so in northeast of England. So my concern is, if we diverge further, it's going to have more of an impact on manufacturing sector, and it will have a regional impact to our country as a whole. And this is something that studies by the LSE and other organizations and academics have found as well. So there's a regional issue about divergence that has to be taken into account, and doesn't seem to align with Boris Johnson's statement about leveling up across the UK. So those one area which I'm sort of deeply concerned about going forward here. And from another business point of view as well, is that even if the UK diverges from a lot of these European laws, the UK firms will have to abide by them if they want to export and do business abroad as well. And that's something that is not taken into account. Now, so why is it that the Conservative government thinks that divergence might be a positive thing? It's because it gives us more flexibility to sign trade deals with other countries. And this is where our 10 principles really come into force. So we know, for instance, that the US has lower standards on manufacturing, especially related to green policies, for instance. And we also know that they don't meet our standards for when it comes to agriculture and food. And in fact, the biggest reason why the US has struggled to export into the European Union is not actually because of tariffs. It's because they don't meet the European Union standards on animal welfare and other factors. Okay, so for instance, the US doesn't actually have significant laws around slaughterhouses, for instance. And obviously, we've heard a lot about coronated chickens. The reasons why they need to coronate the chickens is because of the process that they go through, means that their animal feeds are most likely to be infected by diseases, for instance. So we know that the process we go through isn't welfare. It's not friendly to animals, for instance. so one of the, I know there's sort of arguments and different points of view on this, whether the Conservative government is going to not align to European Union laws on agriculture, or they'll have stronger standards for the US. I think it sort of depends on which sort of side you look at it. I think there was an argument that because agriculture in the UK only accounts for 1.6% of our economy, that actually it's something that we can bargain away to get a trade deal for the US in terms of financial services, for example, which is a bigger part of our economy. And so we know when we do trade negotiations, it's all going to be about which things we're going to negotiate and so on and so forth. But and the economic rationale by a lot of economists to support Brexit, and this again links to the part about fairness, is that a lot of these jobs that can be lost in agriculture could be replaced by service firms. Okay. However, we know that most of the agriculture output comes from East Anglia and southeast of England, and so and we also know a lot of the farm industry is run by generational families, so they're going to be impacted heavily if we have an export agreement with the US. And the reason why that is that the US has a surplus of production of agriculture. And because they don't have the same standards the UK does, they're more efficient at producing animal feed at a much cheaper price than we are. So in a sense, they'll be much more competitive than we are. And it comes also about consumer choice and knowing about high standards. Within the US laws, there's not laws around labeling. So when we look at food product labelings, actually the laws are much more lax than they are in the UK. So that also sort of has some issues. I've got quite a lot of points. I'm wary that I'm talking quite a lot, so I'm going to I'm going to stop talking soon. I do promise. But I wanted to sort of go through to the digital side of things as a whole as well. The European Union digital single market is still in its infancy, but it does play a big role for the UK. A lot of UK startups, a lot of digital firms use the UK as a hub. And we can sort of see this with Viacom and Discovery, US companies who set up their European headquarters in the UK. And the reason why that is useful is copyright laws and digital laws allow the UK the firms to abide by UK laws, and which tends to be less restricted than the rest of the European Union. But because of digital passporting laws, they can export across European Union, and it helps firms to expand quite quickly. Now, we've already seen that Viacom and Discovery have now shifted their headquarters away from the UK because they're concerned about this. So this argument that being part of the European Union shuts us off from the rest of the world is actually not true. Actually, being part of the single market allows us to attract firms outside of the European Union to come into the UK, which creates jobs, which creates more taxes and revenue for our economy. I've got more stuff to say, but I'm happy to leave that for the Q&A because I'm worried that I've been not talking for quite a bit.